Africa, 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 Africa. Ça fait rêver, ça fait vibrer, ça fait danser. Oh, Africa, ça fait rêver, ça fait vibrer, ça fait danser. Oh, Africa. Bariula Baragaya Bizet Sorona. Bakawalaye, Yawala Balilela. La Guinée, le Congo, Sénégal, le Bénin, Yaoundé, oh, quel beau pays. Africa, 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 oh, Africa, 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 oh, Africa,
Good afternoon, everyone listening to us from all over the continent. I'm very excited to meet you today. My name is Feyi Olubodun. I'm the managing partner for Open Squares Africa, and I'll be your facilitator today for this edition of the presentation of the Brand Africa report for the most admired brands in Nigeria, and by extension, we'll also share with you for West Africa. So it's so exciting. I mean, I've been part of this for some years now. It's always incredible to see what is happening across the continent with brands. And it's even more important now in this post-COVID era. Just before we go ahead, let me just run you through a couple of critical points for us to bear in mind. Once we move into the presentations, it's very important that you are mindful to turn off microphones, especially those of you that are logging in directly. If you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, you can put your questions and comments in the chat box or the Q&A section. We'll see all of those and get to them later on in the day. More importantly, a recording of the event is going to be available on YouTube after this. You can always go back to it and refer to it. Now, while you're following the conversation with us, please follow us on our YouTube or our YouTube page, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Look for Brand Africa Network and use the hashtag. The flow of the presentation today, or the program today, is I'm going to hand over shortly to Karen, who's going to take us through the methodology and the process by which we arrive at this every year. And then Tebe is going to come on right after that to present the report, the results for Nigeria and for West Africa. And then we're going to have a special feature, which is the first time we're doing it this year. I'll talk about that when we get to it. And then we'll go into our panel discussion. And thereafter, we have question and answers and so on and so forth. Joining me now is Karen Duchen. Karen is the Chief Growth Officer for Kantar for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and is a key partner on this project with Brand Africa. And so Karen is going to take us through the methodology and the process by which we do this every year. They've been a partner with us for years. Karen, you're welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Feyi. It's always lovely to spend time with my colleagues and friends in Nigeria. So welcome, everybody, and happy Africa Day. So this is the day I'm sure many of you have been waiting for, to find out what are the brands that are most admired in Nigeria and across Africa. I cannot see the slides at this point. So let me just tell you a little bit about Kantar. So Kantar is an insights agency, and we help our clients to grow, to understand what people think, how they feel about things, and how to connect with brands on the ground across our continent. So as Feyi has said, this initiative, Brand Africa, has been running for 11 years now. Last year, we celebrated the 10-year anniversary, and this year it's 11, and it's still as exciting as ever to see who is connecting. Wow, we have got coverage this year. 28 countries in total, many from West Africa, as well as East Africa, Southern, North, Central. We've got it covered. So do take a look if your country is there. Of course, Nigeria is a very important part of this initiative. And how did we do the actual research? So in the majority of countries, we were able to do this via mobile research. We used the incredible partner Geopol, who has got coverage across our continent. Kantar then puts the data together, codes it, etc., and we pull that together into the 100 index. Right, so let me give you a little bit more information about Geopol, and I'd like to call out a big thank you to Caitlin and her team who have run all these projects across the countries to get us the data today. So Geopol is a leading mobile research platform. They've got 5 million profiled people that they can do the research with, and they cover almost all of the continent. And in order to make sure we had really good reach for Africa, we interviewed people by both SMS, for those that don't have a smartphone, and via mobile web for those that do. Everybody had to be at least 18 years to partake in the survey. And why is mobile so perfect for Africa? Well, for many people, they would prefer to do survey research via mobile, especially in COVID times. And of course, we've got such great mobile penetration now across the continent. So find out more about Geopol on their website. So let me tell you a little bit more about the survey itself. So we've got 4 key areas that we cover. The first and by far the most important part of the survey is the Brand Africa Index. Here we ask people, please tell us your most admired brands, and they can be from any category whatsoever, be it cold drink, be it a cell phone, be it a mobile operator, be it a bank. You can say what you feel emotionally about and what you admire, and we ask people to give us at least 3 brands. We then move on to ask people, now tell me, what is your favorite brand that's actually made in Africa? And what you'll see in the findings is that some people believe that global brands were actually made here because they feel so much a part of daily life here in Africa. Then we move to financial services, such a critical part about development and growth in Africa and helping us to spend the money and connect with those brands using these services. And lastly, and really importantly, is the media brands, because it is the media, it's the television stations, it's the radio stations, it's the print, it's the digital, that allows us to share our brand messages to really resonate with market far more effectively. This year, we also added another question, and that is, which brand has been more effective in helping during these COVID times? It has been a tough year across the continent, and we want you to hear which brands are making a difference. And you'll see that the winning brand here really has made a lot of difference to communities across Africa. So out of all that, we have over 80,000 individual brand mentions. It's quite a massive data for us to deal with. We have to classify it, code up all the data, and put it into a meaningful output. We got about 3,500 individual brand messages. So you can see brands are alive and well in Africa. And our exercise at Kantar was to sort out all those brands, put them into the right classifications, make sure that we've got the weightings and the population data to figure it all out. And after we've got all of that, we put it together into the overall index. And that is really a weighted average index that takes into account the sample size, the population size, and the actual brand score. All of this gets put together to give us the overall Brand 100 index. In order to actually qualify to get onto the list, you do have to be mentioned in more than one country than your local market only. So yes, you can qualify to be a great brand in your country, but to be on the Brand 100, you have to be Pan-African. So I thought I'd give some quick highlights on what we're seeing in the survey data. And we saw that COVID had a huge impact last year. Many categories were affected. Some of those in particular that were affected include products that sanitize. They have seen a huge boost. Products that are connected with sport, although it was on hold, we still see that they are the ones that really connect with people. We saw brands having to try harder if they were in the soft drink or alcohol category because bars and restaurants were closed. So brands have had to be more creative and innovative to connect with consumers. And lastly, we've seen quite a big move in terms of fashion from being more formal to more informal. We just love living in our tracksuit pants in the current day. So guys, it's really true. Strong brands live on despite whatever you throw at them. Okay, let's look at some of the actual content itself. So across every country, we see the beautiful African fabric being mentioned. It's named whatever it's called locally, be it wax, be it Gatenga. It's there, it's coming through, and it's loved by people. We don't get this into our overall index, but you can see how important it is to people. Then what we see is people do want products that are durable, that are lasting and made for Africa, but they look for design too. They love to show their great brands. What has had a huge kickstart in 2020 and 2021 has been online purchase. So we see people across the continent ordering food, bikes, bringing in local groceries and food, and the categories that have found a new way to sell their products, to bring it to people so that they don't have to leave their homes, have been more successful. And what would our lives be without our mobile money? And we see just how important mobile money is in terms of moving cash around our economies across the continent. And you'll see the brands are being mentioned. I think we've got a little internet delay there. So as I've already mentioned, sport, oh yes, soccer, we are football mad in Africa. And the brands that are connecting and sponsoring these games are coming through across the continent. Of course, if you can connect with the sports stars, this really helps to unlock those hearts and minds of the people in the country. As a good example here, we see from Tusker. And brands that really understand people and the people of the continent in which they sell are able to really get into those hearts. And in fact, most people think that Guinness was made in Africa, not in Ireland. The Chinese and Indian companies have been very successful across our continent, in particular this one, Techno, that has really managed to define their offer to make sure that they're able to offer handset at a price that's affordable and that they distribute in the places that people like to shop. What's good to see is our automotive industry is also showing innovation. We see brands like Innocent and Katanka coming through, bringing ruggedness and good price and durability for African roads. Nigeria, look at Dangote, one of the wonderful examples of a local conglomerate that's just expanding and expanding across the continent. It's great to see these kind of brands coming through. From East Africa, we start to see brands like Azam coming through, and there are many others that you'll see in the data. And we should recognize the global brands that have been supporting Africa and building their sales across the continent for many years. Coca-Cola has been passionate about making a difference in Africa for over 90 years. And we'll see that it's why it's one of the top brands in our continent. And let's be thankful to our mobile operators too. What we see is MTN has been noted in 15 countries out of our 28. And it really has become more than just a telco. It's part of our lives. So as I've already commented, many international brands are so a part of our lives, they're now perceived to be African or made in Africa. So if you are a global brand, think locally and continue to act globally. Bring in those good global practices, but really make sure you understand local nuance. Brands like Nike have been exceptional at identifying the stars that people relate to and really backing them for their success. These might be sports stars, influencers like Starboy, or designers, as we see here. Look at those lovely designs coming through, just really reflecting African color and beautiful creativity. So without further ado, I really don't want to hold you back from getting the action-packed part of today's agenda, which is the results themselves. And I can think of no better person to take you through these findings than Mr. Brand Guru himself, Tebe Kalafeng. Tebe founded Brand Africa many years ago because he has such a passion for building brands in Africa. So Tebe, it's over to you to share the findings.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you so much for laying the foundation with those great insights and the passion for the continent that you've always. You know, we started this journey, remember so well, 2010, at the beginning of the World Cup, because we're asking ourselves the question, everybody's coming to Africa, what are they going to consume when they come here? So let's get a metric. Let's try and understand what people are, what we are doing as Africans to build great brands. So that's where we started. Let's see where we headed. So I stole this, someone I admit, I stole this from Mesa Kaba. This painting here is 40,000 euro. So I stole it on the internet and put it here for €1. So I'm hoping that Messel is not going to come to me for trademark violation. But it's a symbolism of what the continent is about. It's a confluence, the confluence of the continent, of all the countries in the continent, is what's going to create the great explosion and the success we want. And the way we're going to do it is through brands. So how we do it? Again, for the second year in a row, African brands represent only 13% of the most admired brands in the continent. 13% of the top 100 most admired. Now you say to yourself, but how could it be the same? Well, everything else is the same. The only difference is COVID has devastated everything else. But what COVID has done, it has brought everything to a standstill. So what a coincidence that even the brands, the ratings have stuck pretty much at the same place. That's why when we talk about COVID, we also talk about a reset. It's time for a reset, to rethink, to pivot, what we're going to do forward. The brands have stuck at the same place. So African brands have stood here. But you'll see there's some interesting shifts, though, having said so. Nigeria continues to dominate in terms of the most admired brands in the continent. 46% of those 13 brands come from Nigeria, followed by South Africa, one from Nairobi, and one from Ethiopia. And you can know what it is. Ethiopia will be Ethiopian Airways, and Kenya will be Safaricom, two of the great brands in the continent. We're going to talk about those. So let's get into the rankings. Let's not spend too much time any further. So what are the most? So let me give you just a run through of what we've learned about the continent so far before we go into Nigeria itself and West Africa. This is what we've learned. The number 3 most admired brand in the continent, Samsung again, and Adidas again, and the number 1 most admired brand again, Nike. What a resilient brand. I mean, this brand has been number 1 for 4 years in a row. 4 years. This is a brand that knocked off Samsung in some of the earlier years. It knocked off MTN in some of the earlier years. A very resilient brand that really understands how to get to the hearts and minds of consumers everywhere. So we know when you go where the different taxis you see out in where we live, you see people have got Nike's other tattoos, Nike painted everywhere else. So you begin to understand how the brand is a part of identity. So the top 10 brands in the continent, Nike, Adidas, Samsung, Coca-Cola, Apple swapped places with Techno this year, Puma, Gucci. People say, how could Gucci be on the list? It's too expensive. You can't even find it. I always tell people, just go to the flea markets and just go out into the streets. You see the Gucci. Whether it's a real thing, that's none of our business. But the Gucci is there and people are wearing it. They may not recognize it with the people in Italy, but it is part of us. Because brands are not necessarily about accessing the premium brands, but it is accessing it's really about what you aspire to have, and the closest you can have is the counterfeit. So be it, and that's what you see. Matter of fact, across all those categories, from Nike to Adidas to Puma to Gucci to Zara, you'll get all the counterfeits that you want. So this has always been one of the most interesting ones. When we ask the question, what is your most admired African brand? When we ask that question, the number 1 brand is Dangote. Now, if you know Dangote, the brand, very well, it is probably omnipresent across particularly West Africa. If you go there, you see it's in cement, it is in it's oil, it is in food, it is everywhere. And I went around the markets in just outside of Lagos, and I was looking at the markets just to try and understand. And I saw in some areas people had a poster of Dangote, the person, and the poster of the person Dangote selling the products Dangote. And I said, it's that simple as that association of I know who he is and I know what he sells. But having said so, Dangote has built an incredible brand across the continent over the last, I think since 1981 or so, it's been around. Then followed, if you ask the question, if you don't ask the question, you just ask what's your most admired brand, and to isolate all the African brands, the number 1 brand is MTN. Dangote and MTN, they interplay. They are the 2 strongest African brands, but far by far. Dangote being a strong industrial brand and telecom and being a strong telecommunications brand. You can see some of the brands which are ever present. What's interesting about these brands on this list is the brands that pretty much we live with every day. We shop at ShopRite or we shop at Jumia. We make our calls on Glow or we make them on MTN. We buy from Dangote, we watch TV, and we wear M-Pesa and we fly Ethiopia. Ethiopian, what an incredible story. The brand that throughout COVID really outperformed all of them. We'll talk about that in a minute. And ShopRite, Safaricom with M-Pesa is just an undisputed a story about how to build a transformational brand. So let's look at the most admired media brands in Africa. Number 1, CNN. Number 3, rather, CNN. Now, BBC has been number 1 brand in the continent for 10 years. It's been that because if you want to watch world service, they're in radio, they're in programs, they're in magazines, they are everywhere in the continent, over and above their television. They're the big, embedded in the story of the continent. So to be knocked out, what is some doing? What doing did it take? COVID. What happened during COVID? During COVID, we underwent an incredible period of isolation. In isolation, what happened? A lot of streaming services, a lot of subscription services that made DSTV the number 1 brand in the continent. So DSTV was catapulted to the top of the list because of COVID. The strong brand is the brand of brands that houses all the other brands and has done incredibly well in the continent. So if you look at the top brands, DSTV number 1, and if you look at that list, you know what's so interesting about this list? If you look at this top 10, how many African brands do you see there? DSTV, and by the way, consumers rate an MTN as and an MTN and Glow and all those. They rate them also as media brands because through those phones they can get a lot of news and information. They can access information, so they view them as their channels as well. So what is interesting about this list? 80% is non-African. So a recent research was done by Africa Law Filter. It was done about 2-3 months ago, and they established that 63% of the foreign correspondents who report about Africa do not even have presence in the continent. They don't have correspondence, rather, in the continent. They are telling the story about the continent without being in the continent. And when they do tell the story with an African, only 1% of the content comes from African correspondents. So you can see the challenge that we face as a continent. The challenge that we face as a continent is we are not telling our own story. As Chinua Achebe said, until the lion learns how to tell its story, tales of the hunter will always be glorified. If you come to financial services, Absa, dominant, rebranded, bought over the assets of Barclays, and is rebranding across the continent. First bank from Nigeria, strong since 1894, always been there. But the one bank that is number 1, the one brand rather in financial services that is really established its footing by redefining itself. If you look at their annual report, if you look at their strategic story, what are they saying? They're saying that we need to be digital led, we need to be service first, we need to be a bank of the future. GT Bank, number 1 most admired financial services brand in the world, in Africa. Do you know what's interesting about this brands is not all of them are in every country, like in many countries, like MTN, which is in about 25 or so countries, or Dangote perhaps in also about 15 or so countries. Some of them, like JT, are perhaps mostly, you'll find it in West Africa, and they have correspondent bank. But where do we see all these banks? We see them all on television. We see them all being spoken about. And that's how these banks, these brands, travel out the continent. You can see the list of the brands that are most admired, dominated by Nigeria and dominated by South Africa as secondarily. But we know that as well intuitively, because we know when we think about the banks in the continent, we know exactly where they come from. Other than Togo, which is probably one of the biggest network with EcoBank. So Karen spoke earlier about the about the survey that we did this year, the question that we put into the list this year. The reason we put in that question is we wanted to find out what is the most admired brand during COVID, the brand that was helpful during COVID. Number one brand, WHO, World Health Organization. I don't think this is a thing. Just on the list of 25 brands that we've isolated, it's quite interesting. Because if you look at the list, over 80% of it is private sector brands, the top 25. We've given you here the top 10 brands to look at. Number one, African brand, NTN. Number one, non-African or other global brand, WHO. From a Nigerian perspective, Dangote in the mix. You can see the mix is a mix which is dominantly private sector, and to a less extent you'll see some public sector brands are in there, which speaks something interesting. And I think what it says that there's an expectation or an acceptance that private sector must do more than just be transactional in this relationship with consumers. It must also contribute to its well-being. I think it was a survey that says 70% of the consumers say they will dump a brand if they feel that it is not contributing to the well-being to their well-being. The category remains consumer non-cyclical, which dominates about 17% or so. It's gone up by 6%. Electronics, 20% electronics, 17%. Auto manufacturers, we saw the Innocent and the Kantaga. I always find that just because those are the two categories which really require a lot of investment, and for them to get to this level really speaks to for this category to grow to this level, speaks to the potential of the continent and the pivoting of the continent in looking to itself. Karen also spoke earlier about the 10 brands, about the brands perceived to be African. So this list, by the way, we pulled it out of the list of the questions when we asked the question, what is your most admired African brand? When we asked that question, these are some of the brands among the brands in the top 50 or so that we pulled out. Coke, Nike, Technos, Nestle, Adidas, Vlisco, Samsung, Airtel, Vodacom, Guinness. Vlisco, I think we can perhaps understand, because Vlisco, we've always thought Vlisco was African until somebody reminded us, no, it is from Holland. It came in that ship that came to South Africa and never left. But it is. But if you look at the list, the reason some of these brands like Vlisco, for example, are so dominant in the continent is because you look at all the fabrics. Karen spoke about the one fabric, the fabrics earlier, the fabrics that are so dominant across the continent. When you look at those fabrics, whether it's Vlisco, GTP, or whatever they have around the continent, all of them have their roots or their money invested in Vlisco out of Holland, because these brands have found a way to be part, to reflect, to be relevant to the consumers. So when you look at the categories that are reflected in the results, we spoke earlier about the Nikes, the Samsung, Ethiopian. I mean, Ethiopian during COVID is the only airline in the continent that survived. I speak to my friends in Ethiopia. I was in Ethiopia last week, and I was speaking to my friends. I said, explain the story for me. Explain, how did Ethiopia do it? It was a conversation that somebody said earlier in an earlier panel. I think it was in the panel with Botswana and or with Uganda. The chairman of Uganda Investment Authority, and he said there is a requirement for government to invest in African brands. He says, because if you don't invest in the brand, you're not enabling its growth. He says the same way that Samsung was enabled by South Korea, because understood the power of investing in a Samsung and what it will do for the brand South Korea. And we know what it's done for the brand South Korea. So my friend says to me, well, in Ethiopia, they don't pay tax and they don't pay dividends. He says, so that helps the brand a lot. So some businesses competition, it can't compete with Nigerian Air, with Ethiopian Air, with South African Airways, which are expected to do those things. Well, you have to understand what is the strategy. What is the purpose of that brand? I think that people at Ethiopian understand the purpose of Ethiopian Air, which is now a foundation to build them into a great hub for the world, not just for the continent, with over 130 planes in their fleet. So that's the categories that are dominating the continent. So now let's look at the brands by country, every single brand. Do you know there's only 5 countries? Zimbabwe's Econet, Zambia's Trade Kings, Tanzania's Simu, and Kenya's Safaricom. What have I left out? I forgot. Where the brand comes from the country. In Ethiopia, in Liberia, it's always interesting every year actually. Their most admired brand is MTN. And in South Africa, the most admired brand is Adidas. So just because you come from the country does not mean that our customers are going to blindly follow you. Just because you're Dangote does not mean that all Nigerians are going to blindly follow you, or all South Africans are going to follow you if you're MTN and all those. But if you look at what Econet does in Zimbabwe, at one stage, the money that was going through Econet was greater than the money that Zimbabwe's Reserve Bank sees in a year. So that shows you the power of how important that brand was in terms of remittances and all those. And Trade Kings is a Unilever of Zambia, if you know it well. Coming out this week, at the end of this week, is the new African Business Report. Lift of African brands defy the pandemic. Africa's best brands. I forgot to speak about one brand among the most admired African brands. In the top 10 of the most admired African brands, and this cover reminds me, is a young brand called Batu from South Africa. Batu means a shoe. It means a shoe in our language. And where Batu comes from, what Batu has done in 5 years is ridiculous. This year alone, they opened during COVID. In the COVID year, they opened about 10 or 12 stores, grew to about 200 plus employees, and have grown to become the most dominant footwear brand we've seen in our short lifetimes. And I spoke to the founder. I said, "What is the point of this Batu?" He says, "I wanted a shoe that Africans can be proud of, and I wanted a shoe that is more transformational. I want to create jobs. I want to contribute to the economy." So that speaks to that language I spoke earlier in terms of what brands should do. But Batu is also an example of what's happening during COVID, because during COVID, what happened, we had to look internally. And part of looking internally is giving opportunity for the young brands to come up. So let's talk about Nigeria. Let's talk about Nigeria. Let's focus on Nigeria. Nigeria, the number 3 most admired brand across board, Nike. Number 2, MTN. And number 1, Coca-Cola. Interesting. Coca-Cola remains the most dominant brand in Nigeria, well, the most dominant brand in the world. So it doesn't really come as a surprise. It doesn't come as a surprise. Coca-Cola's performance, and you can see this. I'll just take a minute, please. I just want to slow down people disturbing. 2 seconds, please. Just asking for permission for people to speak softer. So Coca-Cola, most admired brand. So what is the most admired African brand in Nigeria? Number 1. Number 3, DSTV or MultiChoice. Because DSTV is a cumulative brand for MultiChoice, GoTV and all those. Number 2, MTN. MTN is featuring there. Number 1, the question, Dangote. Dangote features as among the most admired African brands in many other countries, not just Nigeria. because it's such a powerful brand that speaks to African industrialization. We talk about industrialization since 1963. This is an example of what we can do as a continent, and we can look at the list. Do you know what's interesting? The number 1 brand there and the 10th brand there in this list. Throughout COVID, that's all I saw on TV. Dangote, Bua. I almost said these two Nigerian giants are going at each other. They're going at each other on television, and it's quite interesting. But you can see the most dominant. What's also interesting about the most admired African brands in any country is people think about their country first, then they add other countries, unless the other brand is really so significant, like a Dangote. So you can see here, the list is dominated by Nigerian brands. You'll go to other countries like Morocco, it's all Moroccan brands. Most admired local media brands, Alive, NTA. And I was speaking to a friend of mine about these. I think I was speaking to Faye as well about these brands. And I said, Faye, I've never heard of these brands. That's because you are not an everyday Nigerian. Then you will understand how strong these brands are. And some of them are not even that old. Number 1 most admired media brand, MultiChoice. The most admired media brands in Nigeria, JTV, NTA, Alive, CNN, channels. Channels did very well last year. And then you can go down the list. So let's go to the most admired financial services brand. Zenith, one of my favorite banks. First Rand, one of my stalwart brands. GT Bank. GT dominates. I mean, if you look at the work that GT does, even in Nigeria, in terms of how they have gone out of your traditional financial services way of marketing, whether it's a fashion weeks, whether it's technology, that explains why a bank like GT is where it is in the continent. Most admired brands during COVID: Dangote, NCDC, Bua, MTN, Indomie. Now, I know some people probably say, NCDC, what did they do? Well, you know, it's like WHO. You will sit there and ask yourself, did WHO really perform, or were they just ever present in our minds? Some people say WHO missed the pandemic. Some people say NCDC missed the opportunity to protect Nigerians. But I tell you what, presence makes the heart grow fonder in many ways, rather than absence when it comes to brands. Most admired brands by region: West Africa, Samsung. So Samsung is such a dominant brand across the region. Number 2, Nike, Coca-Cola, Adidas, MTN, Techno again, Gucci, Apple, Nestle, Dangote. So the number 1 African brand in West Africa, Dangote. Go down the list, you get the Casablancas, you get all those from Ghana and all those many other brands. But the top 10 brands across West Africa are all non-African brands. We have our work cut out for us. We really need to do something in terms of, I'm not a proponent of saying we need to kick out the global brands out. I'm a proponent of saying we need to take the fight to them. We need to take the fight to them the way it is, you know, why are we disrespected by having to buy second-hand vehicles that are brought in through the back door into the country? Let us create our own vehicles. That's how you take the fight to them. You take the fight to them like Dangote does. Says, why should I bring cement from France or cement from South Africa? Let me create my own cement brand. So in conclusion, this is what I think. What I think is we have lost ground, but we have not lost ground, but we're still low. 13% is too difficult. It's too difficult if you look at what we need to do on the other side as the catalyst, which is we are saying, as part of the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, that by 2030, we should have 50% intra-Africa trade. We are at 15%. We are at 18%. How are we going to get there in 9 years when we couldn't get there in the last 50 years? I'd like to be an optimist, but I also need to be a realist. But if we have to be forced to get these things done, then we need to roll up our sleeves. We need to start creating brands. Because what other brands are going to be moving throughout the continent if they're not African brands? And how are they going to move if we cannot? You take everything on 2, Nigerian is on 0, and is on 0 wheels. Only Ethiopia, one country cannot carry the continent. And if you want to move around, to pay 30 visas to go to every country in the continent, I shouldn't be spending so much money on visas. And I think I used 12 passports. And 12 passports to go through the continent. It should be easy to travel through the continent. We know what the ECOWAS, I was watching it in TV yesterday with Nana Akufo-Addo talking about, he was being challenged on the ECO currency, the postponed implementation. Supposed to happen last year, made it easy. It should be easy. Like when you travel now, you have to have money for every country. You have to have a passport for every visa for every country. You have to have a certificate for every country. COVID is one of two things. It's either, we know it has been a curse because it has disrupted life and livelihoods. But we also know it is an opportunity because of COVID, we now have to think locally. So a survey by Made in Africa said 62% of Africans prefer to buy local. So there's a focus on local, meaning that COVID has forced us to think inside. COVID has forced us to start thinking, how do we move? How do we create out of this? Because the rest of the West has shown us, and the Western East has shown us that when they are concerned, they are going to get greedy about their vaccines when it comes to when and how and who they look after. So that means, as Africans, we now need to look to ourselves. Why are we creating our own vaccines? But while we add vaccines, why are we creating our own food? While we add our own food, why are we creating our own cement? Why are we creating our own products that are competing with the rest of the world? So how are we going to do this? So a few weeks ago, we started a few months ago, we started Buy Africa, build another movement. We need to do this, we need to do that, we need to invest in the continent, we need to get our brands to support it, we need to, and we always say, that African countries must do it for several reasons. They must do it, they must be credited in Africa, trade in Africa, tax compliant in Africa, employ someone in Africa, serve African consumers. When we are doing this, we are beginning to contribute towards the big mission of building great African brands, but most importantly, of building an independent, economically independent Africa. Because we may be politically independent, but we have zero money to see ourselves out of this. How do you explain that the African Union, over 80% of its budget, is spent on Africans? Let me show you how we need to start taking matters into our own hands. Fairly.
Wow, that was awesome as usual, Tebe. It was great to see how the brands are doing, especially post this COVID period. Ladies and gentlemen, listening in and participating, kindly put in your question and for us to discuss, or if you have any questions for Tebe, you can put them in there, or even as we go along into the panel. Tebe, I've got a couple of questions for you because I mean I've participated in this for about 3 years or so now, and a couple of things stand out from what you said. One of the things I'd like you to maybe comment on a little bit more is the observation that it seems that for you to play in Africa, you have to play the long game as a brand. Because when I reflect on the brands that you've presented, the brands that you mentioned as number one, number two, number three, either on a country level, a regional level, on a continent level, or even a category level, they seem to be brands that took the long game. You look at a Coca-Cola being perceived, being the most admired still. You look at a Techno being perceived to be an African brand. That's incredible. You look at a GT Bank still being the most admired financial services. What are your thoughts? Could you deep dive a little bit on this for us? This idea that the Africa game seems to be a long game, especially for brands that want to win on the continent.
I think it's a mix. It's a mix. But I'm so glad you asked that question, because when we analyzed the results of the last 10 years, we looked at the ages of the brands. So we did an analysis of how old the brands are in the continent, and how old African brands are, and how old I think somebody's fiddling. We looked at the ages of the brands. African brands on average in the top 100 over the last 10 years were 40 years old. Non-African brands on average over the last 10 years were 80 years old. So your point is so important, and it's so true, that it is a long game. That they say you build a brand like a bird builds a nest, one strand at a time. It's something, it requires a sense of patience. The problem that we have as Africans is we open up a shop tomorrow, we put little money into it, we don't invest in it, and we say we've got a brand. But we don't have a brand, we just have an idea. We just have like a shack or something. We need to understand that in order to build a great brand, is going to take a long time. So if I look, the first one is the ages. I then looked at the survey, the last 10 years of brands, then I said, what is the one other thing that distinguishes? When you look at Kenyan and brands, majority of Kenyan brands and Nigerian brands were created after their independence. So which is 61, I think it was, and 64 something, I can't remember the dates well. If you look at South African brands, they were all created before independence, so before 94, and most of Nigeria and Kenya's brands were all created. So it was quite an interesting interplay. Looking at the first bank created, 1894 and all those, but then you've got all Mutual South Africa created, which is 175 years, and Standard Bank, which is over 150 years old as well. So it is a long game. So the brands which are dominating in the continent, not just the non-African brands, but also African brands, the smaller ones are very old. From First Bank, my math is also good, from 18 something to now that's 200 years or something, to Old Mutual 175, to Standard Bank over 150, and you can go through the list. So the ages of the brand tells you that we need to be a bit more patient when we are going to build brands. We need to invest in them. We need to nurture them. And we just need to be deliberate in them. Yes, there are those categories which will be so, and that's why I don't want to make it like a one statement for everything. If you look at M-Pesa is what? I don't know how many M-Pesa is about 15 years or so. M-Pesa is about 15 years old. When M-Pesa started in 2006, access to financial services, as the World Bank estimated in Kenya, was about 5%. Just 4 years later, 2010, because of M-Pesa, access to financial services had gone all the way up to 70 years. So that shows you that a brand can be transformational, and not all brands travel the same journey. So some brands, yes, particularly now in the digital era, we know whether it's a Facebook, whether it's a Google, whether it's an MTN, and all, we know those tech lives, they reach maturity, or they reach much faster than your other brands like the Dangotes, who started in 1981. I think Dangote, if you will. So I hope I answered you, Faye.
I mean that's just an awesome thought. I mean, we could stay there. I mean, you could see the dynamics. And if you consider the fact that on average, most CMOs have a tenure of about 3 to 4 years, and I mean the shortest run of a brand that has featured on this list, as you mentioned, is about 8 years. You know, so if CMOs are going to build brands of stature, they've got to think beyond their tenure, isn't it? That's the tension there. The other thing I just want to sort of get you to talk about is also the fact that it seems that in the study, admiration is highly correlated with aspiration. you look at the Nigeria where the most admired brand is a Nike, and we know that Nike is not present as a brand operation within the country. I mean, the brand is here and all of that. I would have expected to see other brands as number one across categories. But then you mentioned that people pick brands that they admired, not based on whether the brands were authentic or copies, but because that was what they aspired to. You know, I just wanted to comment a bit about that. We see a Dangote as well. Quite a lot of Nigerian musicians now, every song they sing, there's something about wanting to be like Dangote in the song, and all of that. It's quite an aspirational figure as an entity, and also an aspirational figure as a company and as a brand. Would you say this is a pattern that is consistent across markets in Africa?
Oh, I think so. Most definitely. So now let's think about it on its most basic level. Everybody dreams about being something better than they are. So when we grow up, whether we grow up in mud houses or whether we grow up in roofless houses, we always see ourselves as CEOs or having a better life than we are. Now, the interesting thing when you look at this list, and I think if you look at the luxury brands, which represent about 8% of the table, they're always around 8 to 10%. And it always astounds me that on the list, you've got Ferraris, you've got Dolce & Gabbana, you've got Louis Vuitton, you've got Gucci, and I always said to myself, but those brands are only available in 1 or 2 countries in the continent. But like you say, it is the aspiration because as you know, a brand in many ways is a state of mind. It is a destination. It is. I always explain to some people. I said a brand is like religion. So you are not necessarily there, but you want to get there at some stage. So when you position a brand, you position it the way God positioned himself in our lives. It says, one day you are going to find salvation. So we may not always get there, but we aim to get there. So brands are that state of mind. It is that thing that wakes you up in the morning and says, I'm going to work harder to get there. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to change your life, but it just represents progress for you. So that's why even if you buy it in Mokola, or whether you buy it in some other market in South Africa, and you buy it for $10 or 10 naira, knowing very well that the real thing is something else. Also knowing very well, I mean, some of the brands that I've seen around the continent, the logos will be upside down, some of them will be mixed up. It doesn't matter. What matters is I have bought into a state of mind. I've bought into a future positioning. I've bought into future salvation. And that's what pretty much our brands do for us. And it's got nothing to do with distribution. If distribution was a metric of great brands, then most brands will just not feature on the list. And most brands will not even waste time building the brand across different places in the world, not just in the continent.
That's awesome, Tibi. Thank you so much. I'm going to pause you now, and then when we get to the panel, I'm going to drag you in again because there's a couple more stuff that I'd like you to discuss along with the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time this year, we're adding something new that I'm personally excited about. And what we're adding this year is the brand feature. We decided that this year, instead of just talking about these brands in abstract, we're going to pick one of the brands that featured on the top 10 within this region and actually feature them. We'll run a short video in a few seconds that shows what they've done on the continent. And then we're going to have a chat directly with the client to sort of get a sense of how they've done it. The brand we're featuring this time is Techno. Techno is an amazing brand. I mean, the first time I landed in Addis Ababa, I thought Techno had bought the whole of Ethiopia. They were everywhere. And I particularly enjoyed the story of Techno, having been lucky to have worked in an agency that helped to build the brand in the early stages of its development. And now it's a behemoth when it comes to mobile phones on the continent. So we're going to play for you very quickly a short clip about Techno and its history in the African market. And then I'm going to have joining me right after that the communications manager for Techno in West Africa, Vincent Uzoegbu. So please, let's play the brand feature. Thank you. Wow, what an awesome brand. Joining me right now is Vincent Uzoegbu. Vincent is the public communications manager for Techno in West Africa. Vincent, good to have you.
Hello, Faye. It's great to be here.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, we could talk about Techno forever. It's an exciting. You know, I mean, Techno reminds me of one of those James Bond movies. You know, it just snuck into the market. There was Samsung, there was Nokia, they were the huge guys, and you know, now Techno is the huge guy. Let's talk about that for a bit. I mean, why and how why did the business decide to focus very strongly on Africa? And how, you know, what has that focus been like? How have you played it out as a brand on the continent?
Thank you, Faye, for having us. I mean, this is the first time, and I dare say that we are making history, having to feature on Brands Africa on the first brand feature. With regards to our focus in Africa, I think pretty much from the onset, Techno made a strategic decision to focus exclusively on Africa. And so when the brand first got into the market in 2006, the core focus was streamlined to sub-Saharan Africa, West Africa majorly, where mobile phone penetration was very low at the time and was largely ignored by the larger global mobile phone brands, which you also rightly mentioned. We really wanted to bring this mobile phone that would suit African consumers and improve the lives of as many African people as possible. And we wanted to do this by bridging the digital gap through our technology and our innovation. And of course, taking a look back in time from where we are today, the results pretty much speak for themselves. In Africa, we have set numerous records that have actually been the defining moments and have brought us a good level of success and popularity. To mention a few, I think one of the things that has made Techno the most famous, more literally a household name, is over a decade ago, Techno was the first to launch dual SIM card phones in Africa, and the goal was simple: to solve the expensive data roaming problems and also the complexities of telecom service providers, and also the, what I call them, irregularities and the unreliability of these services at the time. I mean, this was a time where technology was very much in its nascent stages in the country. And so we're all growing together, basically. And yeah, Techno was the first to provide the first dual SIM phones in Africa. And then we're also the first to develop longer lasting batteries that provided as much as 72 hours of battery life to help mitigate power supply issues. These two innovations, as simple and as they may sound now, they were really key to Techno's successes. And the realities of those times are still very much around us till now, which makes these solutions even still very relevant today. And with regards to photography on smartphones, let me also highlight that Techno pioneered a solution that enabled smartphone cameras bring out the real beauty of our dark skins when taking photos. Yes, and this camera solution remains a very, very recognized globally, and has also put Techno on the global map. We like to call our strategy the local strategy. And I think in one of the earlier presentations, something was mentioned about thinking globally and acting locally. And the local strategy for us, local pretty much is a fusion of two words, global and local. And that just summarizes the idea of thinking globally and acting locally. And for more than a decade, this local strategy has been a great success for us in Africa. And now we are taking our African experience and know-how to other parts of the world, expanding into other fast-growing emerging markets, and also empowering us to go global from Africa. And today we have entered a new chapter, and we have become the leading player in mid to high-end mobile brand segments in Africa. And um, for us to keep having this kind of breakthroughs, right, we will continue to upgrade our technology to improve consumers' experiences with more cutting-edge innovation, elegant, fashionable design, and also making our devices specifically crafted to meet the needs of the African consumer. Um, that's pretty much what the story has been really for us.
Yeah, it's been an incredible story. I mean, the way the innovations that seemed so minor to you are actually quite significant, given the kind of the way the continent is, power issues, income issues, and all of that. And you've been able to sort of surmount all of those barriers using technology and innovation, and have become a brand that is not only present in terms of global local penetration, but the stature that you now have globally is impressive. I mean, sponsoring Man City,
Manchester City.
The brand ambassadorship with Chris Evans, very very epic stuff going on there. Now, what amazed me most recently though is it seems as if while there was COVID all around the world, there was no COVID in the world of techno. Because
Oh,
even
wow.
during the COVID period, there was all kinds of, you were doing all kinds of things. You launched about 2 or 3 extensions during the COVID period using very top line brand ambassadors, especially in Nigeria. It was incredible. I mean, I was fascinated by what you were doing. Could you share with us some of the things that motivated that, and why you decided to that you were going to continue to engage your consumers in very creative ways, in spite of the challenge of the period?
2020 did come with a lot of uncertainties. I think so. When we talk about some of our activities in 2020, I think these are pretty much things that we had all planned out, and then COVID came, and everyone became really worried. Everybody became scared. What were we going to do? Was it the right time to communicate or not? And all that. But at the same time, we realized that, I mean, people needed to communicate. And so people did need devices to reach out. And so we had to go ahead with some of the things that we came up with, our product lines and all that. And so during the pandemic, we pretty much kept our eyes on the world and on the actual needs of our consumers. While COVID-19 still very much exists, so we can't exactly say we're in post-pandemic times. And perhaps it's okay to say that we've had much of the worst days behind us, and we are still moving forward with the same vision in the midst of the uncertainties. And so in the heat of COVID-19, we realized the urgent need for people to stay connected with their friends, their families, their communities. And this had to happen in one way or the other. And for us, it had to happen through the mobile phone, right? And that's why we focused more than ever on consistently innovating our technology, especially our product mix, from our smartphone series, the Camon, the Spark, the Pova, the Phantom, and then to our smart audio devices and also smart wearables. And then even in our local operations, having to adapt to the new ways of life that COVID brought, and also consumer habits with regards to purchasing, making purchases and making decisions all this which were brought about as a result of the pandemic. Meanwhile, we understand the evolution of products and technology in closely related societal challenges. So we know and understand how society changes the way we think, the way we act, and the things we do. And also this also translates into technology and innovation. And so for us also understanding this, we also see how this had an impact in our everyday lives, especially on social media. And so let's take the short film which we did, for example. We did a short documentary film, Selfie for Good, #Selfie for Good, which we introduced very recently with the launch of the Camon 17. And the world has shifted permanently to the impacts of COVID-19, and the selfie function has become that very important part of our lives. I mean, people want to continue to stay in touch, and one of the best ways, because if you have nobody around you to take a photo, right, you have to use the selfie function on your smartphone. And so we wanted people to see the good in this feature, and so we came up with Selfie for Good. Of course, people use their phones for several reasons, but we wanted people to use their phones positively and use the selfie itself as an important medium of self-expression, not just for individuals, but also for groups. On one hand, we keep building our capabilities to bring new features and the latest in camera performance. While on the other hand, also, we are calling out on the public to use these mobile phones in a positive way. As it relates to various aspects of taking selfies, for example, we are calling on consumers to express themselves, their real selves, right? Reflecting real life in the most positive, inspiring, and objective ways. Also, because we are strongly committed to serving global emerging markets, we understand the complexities and challenges of having to operate in this environment. And so we take very actively social responsibility seriously. We rolled out a range of initiatives to provide prevention measures, materials, and economic support to our local communities. And this was basically to help our local communities, the people who we live around with, to maintain their safety and well-being throughout COVID-19 and also beyond. And for example, we partnered with NCDC, which is the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, to provide materials aid in the heat of the COVID's effects on our lives and also on the economy. We also joined hands with the UNHCR, that's the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, to support its global education program, Educate a Child. And what we tried to do here was we hoped to contribute to help improve learning conditions and provide quality education to thousands of refugee children, and ultimately, basically contribute to a harmonious and sustainable sustained development of Africa as we know it now, and make it better. And so all this which we did throughout the COVID period was basically to, while we operated in the markets, we also wanted to contribute and give back to the communities where we find ourselves in.
That's awesome. I mean, Techno has been in Africa now for over a decade, and it's clear that that you have plans to be here for much longer. That definitely you're a brand that's playing the long game. I mean, I'm particularly impressed by the fact that Africans think that Techno is an African brand. I think there's no other achievement that's greater than that for a brand. I mean, there are African brands that Africans don't think are Africans, you know. So thank you so much, Vincent, for joining us and for sharing some of this with us. We quite appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right. So ladies and gentlemen, we're moving to our panel discussion, where we can deep dive to some of the issues that we've seen so far. And again, I invite you to put in your questions so that we can take them. I'd like to introduce my panel. I've got a 3-4 member panel, 3 members that you're going to meet now. Let me start by introducing the ladies first. Akua Owusu-Nate is a regional MD for West Africa, Ogilvy. She's based out of Ghana. I've known Aqua for 7 years or thereabouts. She's an incredibly brilliant lady who's had almost 2 decades experience in marketing across digital innovation, consumer insights. Aqua has been recognized as one of the top leading business women in Ghana. She's somebody you'll enjoy talking to and hearing from shortly. Aqua, you're welcome to this Brand Africa panel today.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you for having me today.
You're welcome. Joining us next is Dayo Adefila. I fondly call him Mr. D, so don't be surprised if I refer to him as that. He has been around, as I fondly say, has been around forever. At some point, he was my boss and he has been my mentor for quite a while. Dayo has always worked to put the consumer at the center of technology, of digital, of marketing, and of brands. And everything he has done has revolved around that, from being a strategy director at Insight, for going on to start up one of the early digital marketing companies in Nigeria, Hot Sauce, that won for 3 years in a row the best digital agency, and then a couple of other startup businesses in the tech space, to what he currently is doing now as the head of digital for Africa at PZ Cousins. Mr. D, you are welcome.
Thank you very much, Faye. Very elaborate intro. Thank you. Hi, Aqua.
Hi, Dayo.
And then finally joining the panel is a good friend of mine, Seyi Adeoye. Seyi is the CEO of Peering Consulting, one of the leading marketing research consultancies in Nigeria. Seyi also has been recognized as one of the top minds when it comes to consumer understanding and marketing consulting. He's had a career spanning over 2 decades across the whole spectrum. And prior to founding Peering Consulting over 5 years ago, he was deputy managing director at what is now known as Kantar, handling accounts all across West Africa and Central Africa. Seyi, is good to have you on this panel.
Thanks so much, Faye. Hi, Aqua. Hi, Dayo.
Nice to have you guys. Now,
Hi.
I want us to dig in straight. I'm going to add Tebe to the panel as well. So there are a couple of questions that we'll drag Tebe into at the end. But let's just dig in straight away. What are your initial thoughts and comments on the report that was presented? I'll start with Aqua. Aqua is the most regional person we have on the panel today. So I promise I was going to say that. Yeah. So Aqua, what's your initial impression? What struck you the most? Just going through the report and all of that. Yeah.
I think that 1387 split has still got me tongue-tied a bit, right? The fact that only 13% of African brands are featuring, and you have 87% of the brands being global brands. Is it unexpected? My answer would be no, but I would have expected a bit more, because you find that there's been a huge drive to build local brands. And it's just that it's like you talked about with Tembe earlier, that long game is not being played as much as it should be. And you know that, I mean, I always talk about how we don't have second generational wealth in this part of the world. After one generation, all brands tend to kind of die a slow, painful death. So that's the main thing that struck me. Another thing that struck me, which I was really happy to see, was the additional question around brands that have made impact during COVID. And that was really, really critical, because you realize that brands actually woke up and they went beyond driving transactions and getting people to buy their products to kind of galvanize and support and provide the much needed aid that not all governments were able to provide at a given time, right? So just being able to recognize brands that came to the forefront, and just being able to see some of my clients in there, both past and present clients in there, was very, very meaningful. And just even the recognition of who, right? Because even though the WHO drove quite a few campaigns, Not everybody you wouldn't have thought everybody would have recognized it, but the fact that it was recognized is also something that's very meaningful for me. So those would be the two things that stood out for me. And thank you, Tembe, for the report. It's very, very meaningful for us who are building brands across the continent.
Mr. D, what are your initial thoughts just looking at this report and what Tebe has presented so far?
I think the distance between local brands and global brands, unfortunately, may be increasing. And that's because the global brands are not sleeping. They continue to take the risks. They continue to extend themselves to, like you said, do the long game. It doesn't make me happy, because we do have a few local brands that have now become global. So you mentioned Dangote, for instance, and it was very interesting seeing Dangote push through, across like that. So what this tells me is that, as African brand leaders, we have to make sure that we not only get the fundamentals right with our brands locally, we also remain in the game. The consumer is like nature. Nature abhors a vacuum, right? And once we drop off when brand building, the global brands will just continue to gain their foothold. So quite an interesting report. A few surprises. Adidas was an interesting one. Seeing Adidas pop up there. Nike, I get it completely. Nike is like how Apple used to be, maybe 10 years ago, where Apple didn't really have, that presence physically, but still aspirational wise, Apple was high on people's minds. So those are my initial thoughts. Good report.
Sheyi, I mean, I know during the COVID period, you kept on tracking consumer behavior, brands behavior. You put out a couple of consumer pulse reports over time. What strikes you about this report? I mean, at the first glance.
Wow, thanks, Faye. Thanks, David, for the presentation. I think first off for me would be the fact that brand building really, as is confirmed, it's actually a marathon, not an 100 meters dash, right? And during the COVID period, some brands kind of shut down. I mean, they stopped spending, they were afraid and all of that. But some other brands, even like Techno that we have, that just spoke a few minutes ago, just kept innovating, kept speaking, right? And again, from the whole report, I can see the power of media. GTB is not everywhere, but pretty much all the kind of platforms where you can actually see adverts being done, CNN and the rest of them. You see this brand talking about themselves, talking about what they're doing, talking about the fact that they're different, trying to link all of that to people. And thirdly, again, seeing the admired brands, the top brands, I see the power of linking very strongly to the lifestyle of consumers, right? A number of those brands that play in the everyday lives of consumers. And again, I also see the African spirit. They never, that spirit, that aspirational part of Africa, playing out very strong, typical, as it were, of Nigerians also.
Awesome. Maybe I'm going to put you on hold for a couple more questions. I have two beautiful questions that I'll drag you into in a bit. Guys, I just want to put this out there. How do you think, from your experience, the pandemic has shaped African or West African brands in our case? We've got Aqua that works across the region. We've got Dio there. He also works across the region, multiple regions. Sheyi, you've done some work across region. What have you seen as they say we're in a post-COVID era, but we don't have enough vaccines yet, so I don't know how we got to post. But if they say it, we have to take it. But what have you seen so far? Aqua, as always, let me start with you.
When we are having calls, my name is always the first on the list. So I've gotten used to being
alphabetically, so it works.
I will remember that when I have more children. So just in terms of things that how the pandemic has shaped brands, I think the first thing is that brands have gotten more creative. And when I say more creative, it's not looking at a one size fits all anymore. They are beginning to rethink the status quo. It's not a brief that comes in that says 360. We're going to do a trade activation. We're going to, make sure we're going to do a detailer or a retailer, promotion. It's now being intentional and saying, how do I reach my consumer in a way that is meaningful? So what you find is a big part of this has been the shift to digital, and just the whole idea of how do we connect with our consumer in an ecosystem that is relevant to them and meaningful to them. So one is around the type of content we are putting in social. So we are moving more to snackable content. We're moving more to making sure that we're targeting better. There's the angle of just also waddling into the pool of e-commerce, right? So if you took even 12 months ago, you'd find that everybody was kind of skirting the waters and not even trying to put their feet into the water, right? Everybody was along the bank. But you find that even a lot of the global brands have kind of stepped in deeper and began to invest more in new ways of marketing beyond your TV, radio, print. So that would be one big thing for me, just that whole creativity and the whole idea of digital acceleration, and then beginning to look at things completely differently from what the status quo used to be. So those would be the two big things for me at this stage, and I will let the Sheyi and Dayo input into that.
Ms. Adi, once I hear digital, I just think of you. So you must know I'm coming in your direction. So it's what Akua has said is so interesting. No brand is arguing about digital anymore. I remember many years ago when you began to talk to us about digital, some brands felt like you were, foretelling the coming of outer space aliens and all of that. What have you seen post pandemic? How is it affecting brand behavior?
Okay, thanks for you, and thanks Aqua for laying some of that foundation as well. So I'll take it from two dimensions. One is one borders on commercial, economic impact of the pandemic, and then the other on brand and consumer engagement. So for the commercial, because of drop in disposable income, continued dropping, in that, you find that what we call sachetization, has become, as further grown, which is people, reducing, the sizes of the product. Usually FMCGs, experience this, right? And just, reducing it further for some kinds of categories, right? But we've also seen that for some verticals, what we find actually is increase in size, because people now are looking for value for money at a larger scale. So you find things like moisturizing, lotions, soaps. Some people just want it in a bigger pack so it can last longer. So you can reduce some things there, but they want it. So you see these two, supposedly opposite trends accelerating, somehow, and it's in response to what has happened post. Well, you say we're still in the pandemic. I don't know, So that's one thing. Then the second also has to do with because of how the pandemic led to what we call the lockdown, people being home and all of that. You find that when it began to ease, the desire to use neighborhood stores grew, at least in some parts of Africa. So I can speak about Nigeria very well, because we typically have more of an open market scenario, than what we call modern trade, or in a place like Kenya, their modern trade is more developed. But what you find in Nigeria was that those stores that are in between the open market and modern trade, the neighborhood stores that are just 10 meters away from you, they began to pick up more and more. And we've also noticed from some trade reports, trade reports and things, that trend isn't dropping so fast, right? It's actually being sustained. So the opportunity then is, so brands that typically were creating a plan that was focused on just only open market or ramping up modern trade, they must remember to close that gap, because that's where people are going faster now, and then of course, talk about digital, right? So of course we've seen increased use of online channels. I mean, everybody suddenly knew how to use TikTok. Everybody suddenly figured out, something, here and there to use. We all became Zoom experts and things like that. But what we found is that so platforms like WhatsApp also skyrocketed in use, for instance, right? Because each channel has its own why I use that channel. So people use an Instagram, for certain kinds of entertainment and doom scrolling. I call it, I mean, we call it doom scrolling, where you're just swiping and looking. And then people use Twitter more to really air their views. Like Twitter was that place to really air your views. And then WhatsApp was just your, quick keep talking. I give you some statistics. Monthly WhatsApp usage in grew, from about 90% to about 95%. That is for total, a percentage of total internet users, speaking for Nigeria, right? Age between 16 to 64, it actually grew to 95% in Nigeria. And in Kenya, it grew to about 97%, right? Because there's just, everything you want to do in WhatsApp, which begs the question, right? How should brands use WhatsApp? Because it's inevitable. But how do you use it in a way that you don't switch people off? So people have tried to use their business accounts and things like that. So, and the Facebook usage as well grew. So in Nigeria, active Facebook users now as hit a 30 million mark. I remember when 2008 or so, we were about 100,000 Nigerians on Facebook then, and for several years, the growth was arithmetic, but now with COVID, it accelerated from about 23 to 30 million plus. So I think these are things that give brands the opportunity to look today, but also look into the future. Our plans must remember that we are thinking about the consumers, how to make it better for them, how to make it easier for them, and then we can all cohabit very well.
Yeah, awesome. Sheyu, over to you. I mean, what has been your observations, your findings in terms of how how brands have begun to adjust their behavior as a result of the pandemic?
Right. I mean, there are a couple of things we've seen over time. I mean, like you already said, Faye, we've been tracking at the onset of the pandemic, even post lockdown, we've been tracking. So there are a couple of things that we've seen so far. One, we've seen reduction in personal and household-based income. Daya alluded also to that. I mean, there's a lot of other factors also putting pressure on the disposable income. I mean, headline inflation is double digits, food inflation, job losses. We've seen people coming out of lockdown where about 62% of Lagosians, and by extension, I can say on the average, about 60% of Nigerians actually earn their income on a daily basis. And so you can just imagine the impact, on the financial well-being of people. We've seen the increase, I mean, like never before in mental health issues. People just have this pent up, desire now for socialization, to connect with another human, coming from the fact that you were just stuck. Saturday, Sunday, Monday was just the same day, at some point, and then we're still not totally out of that. We've seen people looking for, side gigs to begin to look at how they can actually, increase in terms of their disposable income. And these always have implications for brands, and I'll speak to them in a bit. We've seen people try to pick up new skills where they can actually earn money. We've seen people, learning, as it were, from the lockdown, post-lockdown. We've seen an increase in savings culture. We've seen fintechs become the new darlings of people. Like, people are looking to save. People are looking to, to begin to look at it, kind of mid to long-term view of their well-being. We've seen e-commerce become less complicated. In fact, I'll call it social commerce. People to the guy by the roadside, you can literally order anything from equal beat to your daily needs to anything really, online right now. And that totally is changing the game, as it were, for brands. Number one of the things I would say in terms of implication for brands is that brand purpose has never been more important than, as it is right now. People are not looking for brands who are just making money off them. They're looking for brands that they can connect with, that actually, has, their own interest and this larger society, at heart. I mean, the reason why Dangote is really big out there is always been a big giver, contributing to every community, to social good. So I'm totally not surprised, in terms of what is happening, and a very strong association with with the personality and the business of the man. And number two, again, we've seen, consumers down trading and very unapologetic about it. We've seen people going for affordability ahead of brand names. I just want to know whether it works, whether it can, meet the need. I'm not so really taken by the brand name anymore. And then we'll even see the availability, now being third place in terms of the ratings, and we've tracked this over time. So as it were, that also has implication for brands, in terms of, you begin to think about how you gotta be innovative, your SKUs, new products, and things like that. Lastly will be for me distribution, right? So digital used to be like, well, one of the things you do, but right now every brand, we've seen people even do product launches purely online using what I call tribe marketing. So you have these micro influencers and these, all the influencers actually, convincing their millions of followers to actually pick up brands. So in terms of how brands, play their game, things have actually moved. And one thing I'll put out there very strongly is that whatever the playbook has been before COVID, every brand has to, re-engage, rediscover the consumers. A lot of things have moved, a lot of things. In terms of communication, what exactly will create empathy, connection, mental availability, physical availability for your brand, we the consumer is totally different. So one big thing out there we've seen it with our clients, and brands that we work with is they're totally rediscovering their customers and their target market and the opportunities out there. So, I mean, those are some of the implications for brands.
Tebe, I'm going to throw a question at you that I was keeping in my side pocket earlier. I mean, you presented brands that stood out during the COVID period, and we saw some strange entities like the NCDC, for instance, which I'm not sure whether they consider themselves to be a brand, but they're there. What do you think made brands stand out during the COVID period? I'm surprised by MTN, for instance, actually, because I'm like, okay, if it's because of telco usage, there are a lot of telco brands out there, why MTN, why NCDC? What do you think, Tebe?
I think to me it's the point I made earlier when I said I think in branding, presence makes the heart grow fonder. And the reason I say so when it comes to a brand, like let's talk about NCDC out of interest. So as I tried to say earlier, is if you speak to the normal Nigerians, they tell you, they're useless. They were not doing anything. We don't even know why they exist. Blah blah blah. But the truth is, to the average Nigerian, because you see, you're talking about the Nigerian who lives in the suburbs. But to the average Nigerian, that is their source of information. So whatever they do when they stand up and speak there, it's a sense of authority. So that's who they look up to, because they don't read Fortune magazine, they don't read Wall Street, they don't subscribe to DSTV. They rely on government to speak. So I think for me, a brand like that, sometimes they stand out for that reason. So that's why I explain, for example, in the South African context, people will say the government is useless. But if you speak to your grandmother, she thinks about the social grant that she gets as one of the one third of the South Africans who get a grant of 1,000 plus every month that puts food on the table. So she associates good brand with making life easy for me, not necessarily being an amazing at what they do and all those things. Even if they're late with their grant, as long as they help them. So to me, so that's how I think they stand up. And then remember, MTN donated 9 million vaccines. Remember what Ethiopian Air did? They moved, I can't remember how many millions of of PPEs around from South America to Africa and around the world. So people remember these stories because a great brand is a simple story told well and told often. And many of these brands, they stand out because their stories are told well, not necessarily by them, but second, everybody talking about that story. So to me, I think that's what it is. You and I, sometimes when we look at the brands, we try and put a different value on them in terms of how well they articulate themselves and all those. To the ordinary people, there's not that. It's what difference they make in my everyday life.
Yeah, that's awesome. What I hear from what you've said is brands have got to be present, they've got to be helpful, and the brands that stood out during COVID are brands that were present and were helpful. I want us to touch on a couple more.
Sorry, Faye.
Yes, please.
Sorry, there were two things I just wanted to also just highlight. The question about what adjustments our brands have to make. So I work at PZ, right? PZ Cousins, right? Nigeria, Kenya, Africa, and then all over the world, right? Two very important things happened to us, during COVID, along with a lot of other businesses, right? The disruption to the supply chain, right, was a very significant, hammer on old ways of thinking, old ways of solving problems, old ways of working. So developing agile principles, agile project management principles, incorporating them into our ways of working was absolutely necessary. It was, in fact, it was essential. And we had to do that because if you didn't do that, you know how it is with your products. If you're getting this from here, you can't get them, all of that, right? So incorporating agile ways into our new product development, everything. I mean, we've been able to do some things in 6 months that normally would take 18 months, right? And carrying that into every other thing we're doing, marketing planning, seeing the value of doing consumers and just basically breaking down silos. It has also helped, to break down those cross-functional silos, right? The second thing I wanted to talk about is that, when I think it was Aqua that spoke about e-commerce. Look, at PZ during this COVID period, we had to very quickly, get our e-commerce, act in order. Good enough, we had some plan, in the works, and we were able to we had to roll out very quickly in Nigeria, and then even in Ghana, by the end of 2020, we had done some test runs, for our brands in Ghana, and does it mean we've become perfected? Not at all, but we recognize that these are habits that we have to learn, continue with, and then see how the best value comes out from there. So clearly, agile ways of working, are things that any brand that's going to make it moving forward has to definitely adopt. Thanks for allowing that.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's so critical. I want us to just talk briefly about the AFCTA and the opportunity it presents for intra-African trade, especially for brands. In your experiences, which brands do you think are ready to go in terms of maximizing this intra-Africa trade opportunity? Aqua, I'm looking at you. If you can't tell from the screen, I'm looking at you. I mean, we were talking yesterday about Alomo Bitters, very incredible brand that's actually a Ghanaian brand, but it's dominant in the bitters category in Nigeria, and I'm sure in other parts of West Africa. I mean, Aqua, what has your experience been? What do you think in terms of brands that are now ready and able in every regard to travel across countries? You hold a regional portfolio, so because of.
So when I think about local African brands becoming cross-market brands, there are a few brands that come to mind, right? The ones that the first one is already Casapreco when we talk about the Alomo, where Alomo is big in Ghana and it's also big in Nigeria. And if you have those two markets, the world is your oyster, right? There's also brands like Fun Milk, which I know is in Ghana and in Nigeria, but only in those two markets currently. But there are other smaller market brands that are emerging. So, for example, M Pharma, which is, and I'm sure you all know M Pharma, which also kind of stepped up during the COVID in terms of delivery of drugs to people who need it. Now, these brands what they have in common is they have a solid base for production, right? They have what they need to produce, they have what they need to be able to distribute, and they are recognizable today. They have a certain minimum presence, and they've got the most of the basics right. Now, once you have that, it opens you up to bigger opportunities across the continent. And the only thing is that it's not always easy. You know, when you're handling one market, the logistical requirements, the people resources, the people components that you need to drive that is kind of manageable, right? But once you begin to expand, there's also the element of how do you remain culturally relevant across multiple markets, right? But if you ask me today, the two brands that stand out at me, jump out at me, and shout would be Casapreco and Panlock, right? And I'm hoping that as a business, they will have that long-term play in mind and begin to put in the relevant structures and the relevant, business requirements to be able to expand their portfolios beyond doing single or dual markets across the continent.
Awesome. Mr. D, quick comment from you as well, and then we'll go to Shay.
Okay, very quick. Two categories, two sectors that come to mind quickly. One, FMCGs, given the nature of the kind of products. Of course, FMCG is dependent on the kind of economies of scale that can be delivered, going outside your country, and then also not just arriving there, but making sure you're able to stand there properly as a brand, and then deliver on those things. The other category or sector really is the fintech sector, really, because it's essentially like software, but of course they still need some boots on the ground, but it's quite easier for them to decide to look for where they can take some of these brilliant solutions across, from Kenya to Nigeria, from Nigeria to Kenya, that kind of stuff. So those two for now. Thank you.
Shay.
Right. I mean, Daryl, you just took that out of my mouth. Fintech was really, was going to be the first one. I was going to mention the financial services. I mean, a brand like GT can do a lot more for the market. We're looking, just play within the African continent. We're looking at 2.5 trillion potential, $1 trillion potential market, and about 1.3 billion people. But one of the things I've also found out from even all the studies and even just studying companies that have actually gone out of their own countries, they're typically extremely very successful in the local markets, and it's typically also very based, whatever they offer in the market is based on the recognizable need and that people are actually willing to pay for. And then if there are similar markets with similar needs, it's easy for them to actually, go cross-border, provide a distribution, doesn't become an e-com, provide supply chains are not broken. But, what is really important is the two things I want to call out will be that they're really successful locally first. Number two, whatever that success is built on must be built on consumer insights. Consumer needs are recognizable and that they can replicate across other markets, and then really with the trade agreement in place, there's so much more African local brands can actually do, even from Nigeria to the rest of Africa, from the rest of Africa to Nigeria, and all other countries within the African continent. Three things again I want to put on the table for any brand looking to go into any market. Again, given that it's based on a need, given that you're successful locally, before you start picking the markets, you want to be sure of, what is the economy of that particular market. Can it sustain your business? Number two, the size of the population, right? How big is the market, right? Am I going to start fishing in a small pond? Number three would then be that what is the shape of the world distribution in the market I'm targeting to go into? By the time these questions are actually answered, and provided that that brand has been successful locally, and definitely whatever they're doing is based on recognizable consumer needs that they can actually replicate across markets, then it's going to be a lot easier for brands to travel across Africa.
Thank you very much, everyone. I mean, we could go on and on this panel, but I'd like to just pull the curtains here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Sakwa, Mr. D. Shay, thank you for having a nice discussion. And this is where we come to the end of it. We're all passionate about building brands, African brands that rise up to stature. And as Tebe has helped us to see, it's a long game. It's not a short one. So I'd like Tebe to just make a quick closing remark, and then we bring this session to a close. Tebe.
Faye, I thank everybody for participating in this discussion. I think if this continent is going to move forward, we are the ones who are going to move forward and nobody else. And I think for the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement is an opportunity for us to create brands that are going to travel the continent. Because if we don't create those brands now, if we don't build those sustainable long-term brands, the global brands are going to continue to dominate.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you for joining us.